All right, I'm here at the National Conference for Media Reform with Jennifer Pozner. She is the founder and director of Women in Media and the News, which you can find at wimnonline.org. She is the author of the great book, Reality Bites Back. Jennifer, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you.
So you've been working, so the organization, Women in Media and the News, obviously it's about women in media and the news. So where are we today? It's 2013. Like, what are some of the biggest challenges that still face women right now? I mean, obviously, sexism is over. I'm just kidding. But
right, yeah.
So what are like the bigger challenges that still surround women in media today?
Do you specific to media issues or specific to just politics?
Let's go with media issues.
Okay, good. Well, it's easy to think that women have achieved equity in media because when you turn on your local newscasts, generally you'll find co-ed news anchors. Although, as I've said in the documentary Misrepresentation, unfortunately those co-ed news anchor teams often look like everybody's grandfather and his third wife. And media companies keep broadcast and network TV news outlets keep firing women once they're over 40 or 45 or so, and there are constant lawsuits about how women are not allowed to age on television. But it's still easy to think that we've achieved equity because women are present in the local news anchors, but unfortunately that's the only news category and the only media category where women have about approximately 50% of the jobs. As you go up the ladder of power in media, women are almost invisible behind the scenes. Women are, I don't have the stats, I didn't know we were doing this interview, so I don't have the exact stats on...
Tell me the exact stats right now.
The exact numbers, and as a journalist, I hate giving a wrong number. What I can tell you is that depending on whether it's op-ed pages or Sunday morning talk shows or front page reporting stories or A-section stories, etc., you have anywhere from 8% of those 8% of those venues are reserved for women, or sometimes it's 12%, sometimes it's up to about 20%. But that means that anywhere from 92% to 80 or 85% of the influential thought leadership and news leadership jobs are still held by men.
That are shaping the opinions.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And then when you go even farther up the ladder, women are only about 15% of executives in Fortune 1000 media and telecom companies, and only 12% of corporate board members in these companies. And when you look at the top jobs, the influential, how these decisions are made jobs, the CFO, the CEO, etc., women hold only 3% of clout titles in media companies. So then, when you see the fact that women, and I should also mention people of color, are nearly invisible in the power structures of media, then it starts to become a lot more clear why you have fewer and fewer. Let me backtrack for a second. Why, at the same time as this is happening in a landscape that has been so merged and so consolidated, where profit is the single most important thing now in media production, it now becomes clear why you have reporters, supposedly not just tabloid paparazzi, but actual reporters discussing whether or not Lindsay Lohan is on drugs or Paris Hilton is wearing underwear or not this week, or who's Kim Kardashian marrying and divorcing this week on CNN.
Right.
And not on the, not just in the Inquirer, right?
Not on TMZ or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the things that they're talking about on TMZ are now apparently also the things that we're supposed to be considering newsworthy on CBS. And then you also find an intense and just never-ending barrage of scrutiny and hypersexualization of not only girls in, for example, advertising or pop culture, but of adult women who are accomplished politicians and Supreme Court justices and news anchors themselves, all being discussed as, the hottest attorneys generals, the hottest 50 women in tech, etc. These are the narratives that we find every single day in news media. And then you look over at pop culture and we find the most influential and the most popular, or I should not popular, the most prevalent form of television is reality television, which has been functioning.
Which is what you wrote the book on, Reality Bites Back.
Yes, reality television has been functioning for the last 13 years as cultural backlash against women's rights and social progress, modernizing the minstrel show in terms of stereotyping of people of color, reviving outmoded, regressive stereotypes and tropes about women, and this is what the business model of corporate media is based on now. So, when you ask what are the challenges facing women in media, those are just a few of many.
So, obviously, corporate media is awful. We're at the National Conference for Media Reform. How does the progressive media, because it's like, you'd like to think that all progressives are great on this stuff, but obviously that's not the case. I know for a fact that's not the case.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little about that and what mistakes do... When mistakes, some might be a mistake. Some might be just they're bad people who are sexist jerks. Right. So let's talk a little bit about that problem in progressive media.
Let's talk about the sexist jerks.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you. No.
Let's list them.
Yeah. So this guy. No. I'm a big believer in talking about structures and institutional issues rather than individual problems. So
no, dish the individual stuff now.
Yeah. Well, that's for the after party.
Yeah.
I think that it's really, I'm glad that you asked that, because it's important that we not think that our quote-unquote friends, i.e. independent media, are always good on coverage of gender or race issues, for example. So think about the fact that unless you're looking specifically at feminist media, unless you're looking specifically at racial justice-oriented media like Colorline, or let me give you some examples. If you're looking specifically at feminist media like Feministing or Crunk Feminist Collective or The Feminist Wire or World Pulse magazine, or looking at specifically racial justice-oriented media like Colorlines or I just listed Feminist Wire, which is also, but in any case, if you're not focused in those very small, very specific areas, independent media in general can often replicate the same kinds of hierarchies and the same kinds of exclusions that we're trying to critique and challenge in corporate media. So here's an example. Look at the Huffington Post, and I challenge you to find one day in the Huffington Post where there's not some listicle about the hottest women in some career path, or there's not some headline about
wardrobe malfunction,
or click the top 10 something who wore it best, and it's usually bikinis and this and that. There's so, and that's just the hypersexualization. That's not even just to begin to talk about really screwed up sexist coverage of news events, right? So, and that's just one outlet that has a woman at the top of the outlet, but that doesn't necessarily change the content, because again, it's not about gender essentialism. I started out talking about the lack of women in those positions of power, but if we had 50 more Ann Coulters in charge of everything, would that change content? No, because we need to be looking at structures also. Mm-hmm. So in terms of you asked specifically about mistakes that independent media make. Independent media, I think, a lot of the time make the mistake of thinking that because we're non-commercial and independent focused, and because we feel a certain way that's more positive, because we believe certain things that are more positive. We don't feel sexist, we don't feel racist, that our content is going to reflect that, and that's not necessarily true. If you, in order to have actual diverse and challenging anti-sexist, anti-racist content, that needs to be just as much a stated priority as any other stated priority that you have on, in your daily news production. So you need to be actively looking to diversify your source base, right? How many stories have we had in independent media outlets about war where there aren't any women quoted in the war story? How many stories have we had about the economy where there are no experts of color quoted? Meanwhile, these are the communities that are affected most direly by the economy, by military intervention, by rape as a war crime, right? And we don't see our communities and our experts reflected in the influential shaping thought leadership positions, such as experts and et cetera, op-ed writers and but I will also say that there are amazing and important roles that independent media play to serve as a counter to corporate media dominant paradigms, right? We would never have had Rachel Maddow or Melissa Harris Perry on MSNBC talking about the kinds of attacks on women's rights in the last election cycle, for example, as thoroughly and as consistently as they did if independent media outlets had not done so first, right? So it really is important. And also, with the exception of Melissa Harris Perry's show and Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC, there's really no other outlet in the entire cable news landscape, for example, that regularly brings in grassroots voices. But independent media regularly does. And we have, whether it's Free Speech TV or whether it's Grit TV with Laura Flanders, whether it's Democracy Now!, whether it's Uprisings Radio, Sonali Kalatkar, these are outlets that are, when they're doing a story on, for example, ramping up of war, they're not going to only talk to somebody from the Pentagon. They're not going to only talk to somebody from an oil company. They're not going to be owned. They're not going to be NBC owned by GE, which is invested in weapons manufacturing plants right up until the time that they merge with Comcast. But you know what I'm saying. Yeah. So something like Grit TV, they're going to be going to representatives from Madre, an international women's human rights organization that has chapters all over the world dealing with the effects of war. They're going to be talking to people who are doing peace work. They're going to be talking to people who are in diplomacy, and they're going to be talking to people who deal with hunger. They're going to be talking to people who deal with resource distribution and wealth inequity, because all of those things play into conflict resolution and war stories, right? So I think it's really important to also, as we are critiquing independent media, remember
all the good things that they actually do.
Exactly. And that these are the places that women and people of color are able to tell their stories. And I will say, independent media online is where women and people of color are creating their stories and telling their stories in the most authentic and organic and persistent way, because there's no middleman. There's not even an independent media middleman to mediate those stories. It's just our own spheres and building our own communities.
Jennifer Pozner, again, she is the founder and director of Women in Media and the News, which is WIMNonline.org. She's author of the great book Reality Bites Back, which you can find at realitybitesbackbook.com, where you can also find media literacy strategies and drinking games and Mad Libs and deconstruction guides and a resource guide to tap you into media activist organizations all across the country. Jennifer, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you.